From WKYC Studios and 3 News Investigates, this is Bomb City, USA, with your host, investigator Rachel Polansky.
I want to tell you a story about 5 guys that upended Cleveland. But before I get into it, you gotta understand the world they lived in.
Because he was killing people, and he was killing innocent people too.
And the thing you've gotta know about Cleveland in the 1970s, it was a mob town, where wise guys didn't just shoot their enemies, they blew them up.
When I got here, there was pieces of body all over the place.
My name is Rachel Polansky. I'm an investigative reporter at WKYC Studios in Cleveland, Ohio. And this is Bomb City, USA, a true story about organized crime, murder, and a fight for control that left everyone dead or behind bars. Over the next 4 episodes, I'll investigate Cleveland's underworld. Along the way, you'll hear stories never before told from former mobsters, killers, burglars, as well as FBI agents, cops, and informants.
Cleveland's a hell of a story, and it involves a number of criminal groups that work together. And if you want to tell it, you should start from the beginning, understand the whole thing from the beginning.
To a lot of people, he was the underdog. He was going up against Goliath.
First up, we're digging into Cleveland's most infamous criminal, Danny Green.
Everybody likes the underdog, but the underdog doesn't win too often.
This is episode 1, The Irishman. The year is 1977. Jimmy Carter is sworn into office as the 39th President of the United States.
That in the end, we will triumph together.
People are lining city streets to watch the first Star Wars movie premiere on the big screen. And Elvis Presley has just died from a drug-induced heart attack at the young age of 42. In Lyndhurst, Ohio, your typical American suburb, just 15 miles east of Cleveland, Danny Green has just finished a dental appointment to correct a painful loose filling. It's an overcast but 60-degree October day. He walks out of the office building and approaches his car. He knows to be careful. He's a walking target. But today, he isn't careful enough. A bomb hidden inside the car park next to his explodes. And it is an eruption that would rock Cleveland's underworld to its core. As police start arriving on the scene, a young FBI agent named Bob Frederick gets a call from his supervisor.
There was an explosion in Lyndhurst, and who was in the area could go see, because apparently they had already identified that the plate was a vehicle registered to Keith Ritson. And so they figured that Keith Ritson, who was an organized crime figure associated with Danny Green, had been the one that was killed.
The sky is like a Cleveland Browns helmet, bright orange, when Bob arrives. It's the smell that triggers his memory.
Well, when I got there, you have 2 cars. One was the bomb car and then the victim's car, Ritz's car, and they were both in pieces. And there were still pieces of the body here and there, and there was smoke, but it was kind of a eerie smell, okay? And people were kind of standing around, sort of in shock, not knowing what had happened. By that time, they had the body on a gurney or a stretcher, whatever they call that thing there. And I said, "Let me see the body." And he pulled the sheet off the body there, and I said, "That's not Ritson, that's Danny Green." So I was the one that identified the fact that he was Green.
What's going through your mind?
Well, what's going through my mind is all of the bombings which we've had, Green was a suspect in all of them. I said, well, they got the guy that was doing the bombing. I wasn't sad. You're not gonna be sad over, just thinking of, because there was innocent people that were killed.
Bob Frederick is retired now. He's in his 70s, still trim with gray hair. And I can tell he does not trust me right away. He's never spoken to a reporter before, and he is all FBI. Quiet, pensive, a little suspicious. It takes a few meetings before he finally lets me record our conversation.
You have to understand something. You haven't heard the story from the FBI. You've only heard it from everybody else out there.
It's a typical winter morning in Cleveland when I arrive at Bob's suburban home. We walk down into his basement, where there are plenty of dusty boxes filled with loose papers and black and white photos, remnants of his work as an FBI agent in the 70s and 80s.
I came into Cleveland in 1973. This was my first office. Just graduated from the academy down there in Quantico. And when I first got here, I did, for about 2 or 3, 4 months, maybe a little longer, I did applicant investigations and applicant backgrounds and fugitives. And then I was reassigned to the surveillance squad of the organized crime.
Bob spent the next 2 years doing surveillance on Cleveland's mafia. He shows me a stack of black and white photos that he captured. One picture is James Jack White Licavoli, who took over the Cleveland family when former boss Johnny Scalish died without naming a successor. Licavoli is wearing a stained undershirt, sitting next to his underboss Leo Masseri in Cleveland's Little Italy.
What was happening was if someone wanted to talk to Jack, he'd have to at least tell Leo Masseri what he wanted to talk to Jack about. And then if Leo nodded and said he could, then he could. That's how that. And they were sitting out in front of the IAB club there, Italian American Brotherhood Club.
This is also around the time when Bob would meet Licavoli's arch rival, the Irishman, Danny Green.
I talked to him on the street. One of the things I like to do is just go around and talk to everybody. I went out there, I said, you were in the Marine Corps, and I was in the Marine Corps. So we talked about Marine Corps, that kind of supersedes everything.
You gotta remember, during this time in the 1970s, Cleveland is a struggling Rust Belt city, known for its burning river and organized crime. Here's some old news coverage from my TV station, WKYC 3 News.
Both his legs are blowed off. That man will never walk no more long as he lives.
Another bomb bombing in 1977. Teamster Union official John Nardi was apparently trying to muscle in on the organized crime action.
Over a single 2-year stretch, there are 37 bombings in Cuyahoga County, 21 of them in the city of Cleveland, and 16 in our not-so-peaceful suburbs. The FBI estimates that Danny Green is involved in 3 of every 4 of them. So who is this guy? And how does he end up on the Italians' hit list?
Being an orphan and growing up with the nuns, you tend to grow up rather edgy.
Well, those who knew him best say you have to start at the beginning. 3 days after Danny Green is born in the 1930s, his mom, who suffers from medical complications, passes away. His dad, unable to deal with his wife's untimely death, finds solace in a bottle. Danny spends his first few years in a Catholic orphanage. When he turns 6, his grandfather takes him in, and they live in the Collinwood neighborhood on the east side of Cleveland.
Collinwood was a rough and tumble neighborhood, very rough and tumble, and we had the Italian mafia, which was, when I was a kid, was called the Outfit. Mm-hmm. You had Danny Green, you had Croatian, Slovenian, Lithuanian, black, gangsters. It was Jewish. It was the United Nations of gangsters here.
Even in childhood, Danny starts resisting authority. His teachers routinely kick him out of class, and he gets comfortable on the streets.
He grew up hustling. It's hard to take the hustle and larceny out of somebody who grew up with nothing.
Eventually, he drops out of high school and joins the Marines. When he returns home, he works on the Cleveland docks as a Union longshoreman. He finds success. The guys like him. He becomes a labor organizer and works his way up to president. I stopped by those same Cleveland docks in October, where Lake Erie's winds bite my skin, making the fall day feel crisp and cold. Large waves with white caps crash into the shoreline.
We load ships and we unload ships from all over the world, and plus the Great Lakes.
A lifelong Clevelander who looks to be in his mid-70s greets me on the docks. His name is John Baker, and he works in Danny Green's old union job as longshoreman's president. He knows why I'm here and who I want to talk about.
Do you have any stories about him?
Well, I can't tell him. No, I worked for him. So did my brother.
He goes on to describe Danny as a proud Irishman who wore his emerald color pride on his sleeve.
Yeah, everything was green. Green tablets, green ink, green his car. He wore a lot of green suits.
Being Irish was Danny's brand, his logo, his identity.
He painted the inside the longshoreman's hall green. You know, everything was green.
You could not miss Danny Green with that flaming red hair, driving that emerald Lincoln, and those green suits, and it was a sight to behold, I can assure you.
Back on the docks, John pulls out an envelope filled with a stack of old pay stubs and hands them to me. I flip through them and I see they're dated 1961, signed by Danny in bright green ink.
We worked for him for 2 or 3 years, and we thought he'd be something in his days.
As John goes through the timeline, he says ultimately, Danny's reign as the longshoreman's president did not last long. He tells me about the day Danny is forced to resign after he is caught stealing money.
He asked me, he says, I need your vote of confidence at the meeting tonight. And I told him I couldn't do it. And he walked away mad, of course. And he came to the meeting, and I didn't give him the vote of confidence, and he left mad. Everybody told him to get out. So he left.
In defeat, Danny's thirst for power only grew stronger. No one would disrespect him without consequences.
And something happened, and he changed.
And that's an attitude also shared by Danny's ex-wife, Nancy Green. In Tommy Reed's 2009 documentary, The Rise and Fall of the Irishman.
Danny was very Jekyll and Hyde. I had a lot of bad experiences through the Hyde part. He would be very nice, then he could be very violent. It mattered what trigger you pulled that day.
Soon Danny would find himself on a new career path, and with it came enemies to confront, some to eliminate.
And then things really started heating up, and there was basically a war for control.
Historian and author Rick Perello meets me in the backyard of his Lyndhurst home. It's not far from the spot where Danny Green took his last breath. The leaves have just started changing color. The weather is cool, but the pandemic keeps us from talking indoors. Rick has a unique perspective. He's a retired police chief in his late 50s, and he grew up in a family with deep mafia roots.
So as a young boy, I learned that my grandfather, my father's father, had been killed, and that it had something to do with the mob back in the 1920s and 30s during Prohibition. In addition to my grandfather, 3 of his brothers, my uncles, had been murdered.
Rick's grandfather was one of the 7 Perello brothers. In the early 1900s, they migrated to the U.S. from Italy and settled in Cleveland. So did the 4 Leonardo brothers. The 2 families would share common ground. At first, they would establish themselves as businessmen who only dabbled in criminal activity. Prohibition did not stop alcohol use. It only changed the delivery model while increasing profits and violence. As we know, power tends to corrupt, and soon these men of 2 families would usher in the birth of the Cleveland Mafia.
Basically, that was what we call today the Sugar War, which was a series of battles over control of corn sugar, which was a very profitable commodity during Prohibition.
When Prohibition began in 1920, the Leonardos and the Perellos began supplying bootleggers with the corn sugar they needed to produce liquor. And Cleveland was an ideal location. Bootleggers embraced Lake Erie, bringing illegal liquor across the water. By 1926, they were making big money, and they parlayed those profits in casinos in Las Vegas and resort hotels in Florida. Around 1926, the Perello brothers decide to break away from the Leonardo brothers to start their own faction, complete with their own sugar wholesaling company. Rick and I take a drive to the neighborhood where the Porellos established that corn sugar business, on Upper Woodland Avenue on the east side of Cleveland. The Italians are gone now. It's largely an African-American neighborhood. Signs of poverty, abandoned houses, and shuttered businesses are at every corner.
So this was their neighborhood?
Yeah, this was their neighborhood. That's Woodland, the front of it, heading west, and then this would be 110th.
Needless to say, the Porellos' new business venture did not sit well with the Leonardo brothers. And in October 1927, Joe and John Leonardo met with the Porellos at their barber shop, the same spot Rick and I are sitting in right now.
The barber shop was next to that house.
It was a short but life-altering meeting. As the Leonardos entered, two gunmen opened fire, killing them immediately.
They were ambushed, basically. Joe Leonardo was killed inside the barber shop. John Leonardo tried to go after his, after the assailants, and he collapsed on the sidewalk outside and died out on the corner. Yeah, and there had been previous mob murders, bootleg-related murders, sugar war-related murders at that corner, and it was dubbed the Bloody Corner, 110th and Woodland.
Joe Porello won that day, and he got what he wanted, becoming the boss of the Cleveland Mafia family. But his success was fleeting. Around this same time, the remaining Leonardo loyalists began teaming up with an up-and-coming Italian mafia gang called the Mayfield Road Mob. The group formed in Cleveland's Little Italy neighborhood, and they wanted what the Porellos had: power and control.
It wasn't about we're going to have a peaceful separating of the ways here, you know what I mean? There was no prenup. They're going to kill you and take what I want.
In 1929, the Porello underboss was gunned down, and in 1930, the boss, Joe Porello, would meet the same fate. The Mayfield Road Mob was now in control, led by Johnny Scalish, who with a ruthless iron fist maintained control over 4 decades, becoming the longest reigning Cleveland mob boss.
John was a good-looking guy, mob guy, family guy, power monger. He really enjoyed that power.
The man talking does not want to be identified, but I can say that he personally knew all of the Italian players during this time, including Johnny Scalish.
Who put the fun in dysfunctional? They were all dysfunctional. They're all whacked out doing crazy stuff. The cousins, the aunts, the uncles, just the drama, if you will, that goes along in being the family.
Scalish took control in 1944 and remained boss until his death in 1976. During this time, he developed a close friendship with another local crime figure, Shonder Burns. We'll talk more about Burns and his deadly collision of power with Danny Green in a minute. But first, Scalish would make one major mistake before his death. He would fail to clearly designate a successor, a move that would lead to chaos. For now, it was James Licavoli, more commonly known as Jack White, who assumed control.
Licavoli was as tough as they come. He was as tough as they come.
But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing from within the crime family, as Johnny Scalish's former underboss, who was slighted by Licavoli's rise to power, was making a move, scheming to take back control of the family. And he had a few guys in his corner, including Danny Green and his Celtic Club.
If you were walking down the street and you had a problem with Mr. Patrick, that's what they called him, you knew you had a problem. But the guy who worked down at the factory, nah, he never had a problem with him.
As far as his involvement in organized crime, Danny Green began as a protege of Alex Shonder Burns.
Shonder Burns, Scalish's close friend and underworld associate, was a Jewish mobster and one of Cleveland's most notorious racketeers.
Shonder Burns obviously wasn't a MAID member, but he was a longtime friend of the mafia in Cleveland, going back to the 1930s.
Because Burns was not Italian, he could not become a made man or an official member of the Cleveland Mafia. But that did not stop him from working closely with them. At first, he used Danny as his enforcer.
He was responsible for doing the heavy work, intimidating people, maybe throwing a stick of dynamite to basically get someone to go along with what Chandra Burns was doing or what Frank Brancato was doing. But an enforcer basically is someone that is a strong-arm man. They're the muscle of the organization.
Later, Burns would have Green running his bootlegging business while he was serving time behind bars. It wasn't until Burns was released from prison that their business relationship began to sour.
And they blamed each other for the loss of this money and started going after each other.
They settled their disputes in an unusual way. Bombs, specifically car bombs, became the weapon of choice.
I think the enforcers and the hitmen liked the idea of bombs because they liked the idea of not having to get too close to their targets. Some of them also thought, mistakenly thought, that all of the evidence would be destroyed in the explosion.
And that's probably what Green thought in March 1975 when Chandra Burns was out drinking at a seedy go-go joint on Cleveland's west side.
Holy Saturday, the Saturday before Easter Sunday, at West 25th in Detroit, Chandra was killed. Chandra Burns was killed in a car bombing.
A reporter from my TV station was there and talked with an officer on the scene.
Underworld figure Alex Chandra Burns was bombed to death as he got into his car in a parking lot.
When I got here, there was pieces of body all over the place.
And the blame for that is placed largely with Danny Green.
The explosion was so violent, Chandra Burns was blown in half. Danny Green had declared war on the Italians.
He was a very proud Irishman, first of all. He was a very proud Irishman, Irish-American racketeer. And he was determined to largely replace the Italian-American mafia, the well-entrenched Italian-American mafia, with an Irish-American mob.
And the city of Cleveland was just starting to earn its nickname, Bomb City, USA. Less than 1 month after Burns was killed, another explosion rocked Collinwood. This time at Danny Green's apartment, with him and his girlfriend inside.
There's not only one, but two significantly sized bombs that were placed next to his small apartment building and office on Waterloo in the Collinwood neighborhood of Cleveland. Only one of those went off. The other one was not properly wired, but the building was just about destroyed. And Danny Green and his young girlfriend who were in there, pretty much they walked away unscathed.
Not a scratch on them. I stopped by that apartment a few months ago. All right, so it's just a vacant lot now here on Waterloo Road, but painted on the wall of the adjacent building is the word kaboom in bright orange and white with an exclamation point. I don't think that's accidental. These repeated attempts on Danny's life did not scare him. Instead, they fueled him. Here's Danny talking to another Cleveland reporter in the 1970s.
But I have no axe to grind, but if somebody wants to come after me, we're over here by the Celtic Club. I'm not hard to find.
His ex-wife Nancy attributes his survival to the luck of the Irish.
And after he survived that one, we knew that there would be many, many more. You heard of the cat with 9 lives, and obviously Danny had 9 of them.
While modern pop culturists have looked favorably on Danny Green, painting him as a likable gangster, make no mistake, he was a brutal killer. And it's important to note that many of these bombings did end with the loss of life. Most of the time, it was the lives of fellow mobsters. But in at least one case, a bomb planted on an Italian mobster's car ended up killing his neighbor, an innocent man named Frank Persio, who was moving a car from a shared driveway so he could get to work.
I think the biggest misconception was Danny is a good guy. I mean, they still try to portray that.
That's retired FBI agent Bob Frederick again, and he tells me there's a reason he never talked with reporters before. He doesn't like the way some of my colleagues have portrayed Danny in the past, calling him, quote, the Robin Hood of Collinwood.
He was a good man for the neighborhood, took care of a lot of families that were in need, gave turkeys away for Christmas, gave turkeys away for Thanksgiving.
To a lot of people, he was the underdog. He was going up against Goliath. Everybody likes the underdog. but the underdog doesn't win too often.
And in these types of stories, yeah, I can see how Danny might be painted as a good guy.
He wasn't a good guy.
Why wasn't he a good guy?
Because he was killing people, and he was killing innocent people too.
But as we know from Scarface, every dog has his day, and Danny would have his. How Bob explains it, the Cleveland Mafia was not pleased when Danny killed Chandler Burns, but they wouldn't kill him for that. No, his execution order came when he killed Cleveland's underboss, Leo Masseri. Remember the man Bob had photographed sitting next to Jack White in Little Italy? Danny killed him too.
In order to do a hit, Cleveland had to get approval from the family they answered up to in New York. So they had to go to Fat Tony Salerno. And they got involved in this after Leo Masseri was killed. Leo Masseri was killed by Green. Leo was a made guy, so that was when they decided we're going to have to take Green out. So they went to New York, talked to Fat Tony, and got approval, so that was it.
And so it was, in October 1977, that Danny's Irish luck finally ran out. Mafia henchmen tapped his phone, and they knew he was heading to that dentist appointment. When Danny approached his car, a bomb hidden inside the car parked next to his exploded, and the Irishman was ripped apart.
Danny Green also challenging the mob leadership, blown up in a parking lot in Lyndhurst.
Bob pulls out another photograph from one of his dusty boxes. It's graphic, of a man's detached arm and hand. He tells me it's Danny's, found some 100 feet away from the explosion. There's a ring on the man's pinky finger with a green stone, and it looks as though his index finger is pointing at someone or something. Maybe even the Italians, as if to say he'd get them back.
Danny Green's murder is not how the story ends.
It's true, because in a twisted sort of way, Danny did get the last laugh when a witness emerged, a sketch artist, who also happened to be the daughter of a suburban police officer.
She sees these two guys in this car. One's in the front seat, one's in the back seat. Ferrito's driving the car, but Karabi is in the back seat. So she thinks this is unusual. Then the bomb goes off. They get on the 271 there. She turns and gets on 271 also. Debbie Spoth was her name. Okay, so she's got a lot of guts, this girl. She pulls up alongside the getaway car and looks at him and then just falls back. And then she sketches, I showed you that sketch, she sketched Ferrito driving that car. Now her father was a police officer at Berea. So she takes that sketch to her father. Her father goes downtown to Cleveland Intelligence and gives that sketch to Andy Vanyo. Andy Vanyo looks at that sketch and says, that's Ray Ferrito. That's how he did it.
That sketch alone was not enough to lead to a conviction, but it wouldn't matter because Bob and his partner were about to find their own pot of gold.
We had the plates on both those cars. And so I'm looking at the registrations in the office. I'm looking at this stuff for probably a half an hour. And all of a sudden, when I'm looking at the validation sticker numbers, I realized they're one number apart. I about jumped out of my seat. And so then we went back to the BMV there in Mayfield, I think it was where that was. And she said, oh yeah, this would have to be the same person that registered both of these cars.
And that's how you were able to get Ferrito?
Well, that's more corroboration that it was Ferrito because Andy Vanyo had already said that's Ferrito from the sketch. All right, and then when we went out and did the search on Ferrito's house, he lived in Erie, Pennsylvania. Right on his, talk about coincidence. Right on his front seat of his car was a Cleveland magazine, open to a picture of Green circled. And then we pulled down the visor. Joe Wiegis and I, Joe Wiegis said, we've hit the mother lode. And he pulls down the visor and out pops the registration for the car too.
Later, Ray Ferrito would talk to the FBI, and that would lead to a flurry of indictments against some of the most notorious mafia figures.
That bombing there and the resolution of that bombing just set off a trigger of case after case after case in this case.
And it would usher in one of the biggest trials of the century, not just in Cleveland, but in the United States. Coming up on Bomb City, USA, the aftermath.
He's a top man in Cleveland on the street right now in organized crime. And so it was very important that he was convicted. You combine this case, the results of this case, with the results of the Green investigation, I can say positively that this is the most severe blow that's ever been struck against the Cosa Nostra family in the United States.
Plus, hear from the man who killed Danny Green.
Well, to me, it was like having a glass of wine. It didn't mean a thing to me. I killed him, and there was no remorse.
That part of the story next time on Bomb City, USA. This has been a production of WKYC Studios, reported and hosted by me, Rachel Polansky, produced by Phil Trexler, and edited by Gianni Catalano. Our digital director is Denise Pulverine. Our digital producer is Megan Hambaugh, and our archival researcher is Matt Hine. Original music is by the Narrowbacks. Special thanks to Mickey Burns, Adam Miller, John Atkins, Susan Moses, Mike Leonard, Will Johnson, Tom Doyle, Beth Domino, and Dominic Trickus. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Bomb City, USA with Rachel Polansky from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on WKYC.com and the WKYC app. From WKYC Studios and 3 News Investigates, this is Bomb City, USA, with your host, investigator Rachel Polansky.
Few turn on the mafia and live to tell the tale. In Cleveland, Ohio, those who did were usually silenced, often with deadly car bombs. Just listen to my TV station, 3 News, report on Cleveland's underworld in the 1970s.
Over the years, our cameras have covered the mob battles. In 1974, underworld figure Alex Shonder Burns was bombed to death as he got into his car in a parking lot. Another mob bombing in 1977, Teamster Union official John Nardi was apparently trying to muscle in on the organized crime action. 5 months later, Danny Green, also challenging the mob leadership, blown up in a parking lot in Lyndhurst.
In episode 1, we talked about the rise and fall of the Irishman, Danny Green. Now let's take a closer look at the man who killed him.
Well, to me, it was like having a glass of wine. It didn't mean a thing to me. I killed him, and there was no remorse.
Plus, a Cleveland mafia boss testifies about the organization's dirty secrets, and it leads to the takedown of 5 New York Godfathers. We have the first and only interview with the FBI agent who convinced him to flip.
He testified against the 5 bosses. The 5 bosses went to jail, and his testimony was crucial because he showed that this was an enterprise.
My name is Rachel Polansky. I'm an investigative reporter at WKYC Studios in Cleveland, Ohio, and this is Bomb City, USA. A true story about organized crime, murder, and a fight for control that left everyone dead or behind bars. This is episode 2, The Men Who Flip.
I killed him, and there was no remorse.
Cold as ice. That's Ray Ferrito talking to a reporter in 1984. Ferrito is clean-shaven, with gray hair and bushy eyebrows, wearing a gray suit with the matching tie.
A man with a conscience doesn't last too long on the streets.
After several failed attempts to kill Danny Green, the Cleveland Mafia, headed by James Jack White Licavoli, bring him in. At the time, he's a California gangster who had just carried out a murder for the LA crime family.
While I was in California, a problem arose with a man who was giving many people problems and bringing a lot of heat by the law enforcement agencies to other people. I took care of that problem by taking him out to the airport and shooting him in the head.
And Ferrito is a killer with ambition. He wants to join the Cleveland crime family. And he says the bosses agree to make him a member if he kills the Irishman. Ferrito and his partner, Ron the Crab Carabia, work on the Danny Green murder for over a year. Eventually, they tap his landline.
I got a key to an apartment in the building. While in the building, we went down into the manager's office and found his lines and tapped the phone and hooked it up to the dead phone that was in the apartment where we were living.
And so they would listen to Green make a dentist appointment for the following Thursday. And when he showed up on that overcast October day, they were waiting for him. Earlier that morning, Ferrito and Carabia had assembled a bomb and placed it inside an iron box that was welded into a Chevy Nova. That would be the bomb car that Carabia would drive to the dentist's office, while Ferrito would drive a 1973 Plymouth. That would be the getaway car. Once Green walks inside the dentist's office, it's go time. Ferrito gets into the Nova and parks it in the spot next to Green's car. Then he rejoins Carabia. They drive to a nearby phone booth where they can still see the parking lot. And when the Irishman approaches his emerald green car, Carabia pulls the trigger on a remote-controlled device, detonating the bomb. The sky erupts, bright orange, and after many failed attempts, Danny Green is ripped apart.
I wasn't elated because I killed someone. I was elated because the job was done and I was going to become one of them and share in the profits. Something that since I was a kid I dreamed of.
But Ferrito would not achieve that dream. In a twist of fate, he killed the Irishman only to be brought down himself, not with a bullet or a bomb, but rather a pencil in the hand of a sketch artist. As Ferrito drove away from Green's death, she followed him. And then she did what artists do. She drew a picture.
She's got a lot of guts, this girl. She pulls up alongside the bomb, the getaway car, and looks at him and then just falls back. And then she sketches, I showed you that sketch, she sketched Ferrito driving that car. Now her father was a police officer at Berea. So she takes that sketch to her father. Her father goes downtown to Cleveland Intelligence and gives that sketch to Andy Vanyo. Andy Vanyo looks at that sketch and says, that's Ray Ferrito. That's how he did it.
I go back to retired FBI agent Bob Frederick's house for this part of the story, as he's the agent who was working the case.
Talk about coincidence. Right on his front seat of his car was a Cleveland magazine open to a picture of Green circled. And then we pulled down the visor. Joe Wiegis and I, Joe Wiegis said, we've hit the mother lode. And he pulls down the visor and out pops the registration for the car too.
Ferrito was arrested. 2 weeks later, stewing in a jail cell, he felt abandoned by his mafia family, who did not hire him a lawyer. So he called the FBI, and Frederick paid him a visit.
So you were the first FBI agent to interview him after the Danny Green.
Myself and Tom Kimmel.
I asked him to walk me through that interview.
He kept building up the story of how they orchestrated the killing of Green. And when it was all over, then he said that we were in the parking lot there and then told us how they killed him. And then we drove off. We got out of the interview where we took a break and Tom said, I mean, he didn't show one emotion all the way up to and including killing Green.
I was taken aback by that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so were we.
Ferrito goes on to tell Frederick that he has knowledge that could implicate most of the Cleveland family in the murder of Danny Green. He says he'll plead guilty and testify against the family if the FBI will make him a deal. The next day, Frederick gets approval from headquarters, and Ferrito is moved to a safe house.
Ray Ferrito talking to you guys here would lead to a flurry of indictments against some of the most notorious mafia figures. Like, this was the beginning.
Yeah,
of
the
the
beginning.
end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from that point on, we started indicting people.
Since the FBI had federal and county charges filed against Licavoli and his crew, they had to decide who they would charge first and with what. They went with the local murder case first, and the trial began in February 1978.
But Licavoli was as tough as they come. He was as tough as they come. I had a lot of respect for him.
That's the voice of James Willis. He's in his 90s now, and he looks his age, with wrinkles around his eyes and a gray beard. But his mind is as sharp as it was in the 1970s, when he was an attorney defending the mobsters.
After Danny Green got blown up, I was representing again Pasquale Sisternino, and I'll always remember I was in Puerto Rico, and I got a phone call from Frank Leonardo, who was Angelo Leonardo's brother, and I asked him first thing, I said, how the hell you find me down here in Puerto Rico? And he told me to forget about it. And he asked me, was I going to be in my hotel room that evening at 6 o'clock? I said, should I be in my hotel room at 6 o'clock? He said, yes, you should be in your hotel room at 6 o'clock. So at 6 o'clock, somebody came, called me, and so he came up and talked to me, and he indicated, he said, listen, we want you to represent the old man. I said, who's the old man? He said, Jack Licavoli. I said, I'm already in that case. I'm representing Pasquale Sisternino. They called him Butchie. He says, we know all about it. As a matter of fact, Butchie, that's what they called him, wants you to represent the old man. I said, well, I'll have to take that up with him. He said, fair enough.
And that was the beginning of Willis's friendship with the old man, James Jack White Licavoli.
Well, when I got back to Cleveland, I had promised that I would go see him. And when I went up to see him, he was in a room, and there were like 4 or 5 of them in a room. I was very interesting. All these guys were all in the same room. I said, damn, this is real life here. And so Sister Nino, when I went in the room, he walked up to me and said, come over here, I want you to meet the old man. There was a bunch of them sitting at a table playing cards. Everybody got up and moved away. And he introduced me to Licavoli.
Just like that, Willis became Licavoli's attorney, and he asked him the same question that he asks all of his clients.
So I asked him, I said, oh, incidentally, what is your defense? And his answer was very interesting. He said, you're the lawyer, you tell me. That's just the way he put it. He said, you're the lawyer, you tell me.
The verdict was reached 3 months later. The jury convicted Pasquale Butchie Sisternino and Ron the Crab Carabia, and they were sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. But the boss, James Jack White Licavoli, was acquitted, free to walk right out of the courtroom.
But it was a good trial. It was one of the best trials that I've ever conducted. But it had a lot of complications in it. And I must have examined at least 30 to 40 FBI agents. That's how many FBI agents were involved in this prosecution. And with Ferrito, who was actually the killer and was the informant, I thought I made a lot of hay with him as well. And it was a not guilty plea.
Good news for James Willis.
Yeah, it didn't go well at all.
Bad news for Bob Frederick, who says they got the soldiers, but they missed the generals.
I think what was going through our minds is, what did we do wrong? Why couldn't we convince a jury of this?
And so Licavoli had free reign over Cleveland again, but it would not last. He'd eventually face federal RICO murder charges in June 1982, almost 5 years after Danny Green was killed. James Willis would defend Licavoli again. He tells me about the day a plea deal was offered.
He said, they said they'll give you 7 years and give everybody else 2 or 3 years if you plead guilty. He said, Jimmy, we're gonna be friends for a long time, provided you don't come to me with no more goddamn deals. He said, if I'm going down with the ship. That's what he told me.
And this time he would go down with the ship. A verdict was reached a month later. Licaboli was found guilty of 2 counts of RICO murder and sentenced to 17 years.
That was an injustice.
After that, Licaboli and his crew were sent to Cleveland's Cuyahoga County Jail, where Bob Frederick says they made themselves right at home.
They had big feasts there in the county, yeah. Yeah, they were. They brought in food. They brought in Italian food from the Italian neighborhood there.
That's right. They ordered special food from Murray Hill, Cleveland's Little Italy. And if you're thinking, wait a second, didn't that happen in the movie Goodfellas? Yes, it did.
So did Goodfellas copy that?
Yeah, they must have copied it. Oh my, you can't make this stuff up, man.
Eventually, all of the convicted mobsters were sent to federal prison, but one Cleveland Mafia member remained untouchable.
We did it. We finally got what we wanted, but we didn't get Angelo.
Angelo Big Angelo Leonardo was named acting boss of the Cleveland Mafia when Licaboli went to prison, and he had a long history with the Cleveland Mafia. In episode 1, I told you the Cleveland Mafia was born when the 4 Leonardo brothers and the 7 Perello brothers joined forces. Angelo's father, Joe, was the first boss, and when Joe was killed by his second-in-command in the 1920s, Angelo, who was only a teenager at the time, retaliated by killing his father's murderer.
They were supervised by the family's second-in-command, Angelo Leonardo. He's the only leading member of the family not charged and convicted for the murder of Danny Green.
Big Ange led the family for another 2 years, until he too was arrested on RICO murder and drug charges.
Then they assigned this case to their youngest and most inexperienced prosecutor, Donna Fitzsimmons. Okay? And little did they know that she's a tiger.
That young federal prosecutor, Donna Congeni Fitzsimmons, is now a 70-year-old municipal court judge in Rocky River, Ohio, a suburb on the west side of Cleveland. She's petite, about 5 feet tall, maybe 100 pounds. She has short brown hair and she's carrying a brown file folder when I walk into her courtroom.
This is all from the 70s and 80s, all these documents.
Yeah, these are from yeah.
Why did you save it?
Because it's meaningful to me, incredibly meaningful to me that I was able to do this.
At the young age of 28, Congeni Fitzsimmons would shatter glass ceilings by taking on mafia kingpin Angelo Leonardo. So how did this case end up in her hands?
I believe that my supervisors did not feel this case was going to go anywhere. The guy that was the head of this office did not think this case was going to ever be successful.
Neither did her opposing counsel. She pulls out a newspaper clipping that's dated February 6, 1983. It says, quote, "Naive lawyerette beats the rap and the mob."
Naive lawyerette.
Lawyerette.
That's what he called me. Yeah, 3 times.
She wouldn't just face sexism. She'd also receive a death threat. But all of this would only fuel her.
We had so much evidence, and you just had to be methodical and know it all better than anybody else, and that's basically what we had going for us. We knew it. I knew it. I knew it like I knew my name, and because I'd been involved in the beginning, I knew every twist and turn of how this case came about.
Her star witness was mobster Carmen Zagaria. He ran gambling and drug rings for the Cleveland family, and his narcotics network was considered the largest in Northeast Ohio.
The Carmen thing was the big break, because he was a great witness, and we had the supporting corroboration evidence that made everything that he said we could prove was true.
Zagaria was on the stand for 4 days. My TV station 3 News covered the compelling testimony.
According to Zagaria, he and defendants Kevin McTaggart, Hans Grau, and Joseph Gallo were partners. So was another man, Billy Bostic, who Zagaria testified stole some of the profits. In June of 1980, while Bostic was walking down the stairs of Zagaria's West Side pet store, Zagaria says McTaggart shot him twice in the head. When he went down to look, Zagaria told jurors, Hans in his right hand had this cleaver, and he was chopping at Bostic's left hand.
Zagaria was able to link the family to the drugs, and Congeni Fitzsimmons says it's around this time that she finally starts feeling confident.
Because I know all the ways we can corroborate him. Number one, he's going to take us to the bodies. We're going to now have bodies and evidence. Sanito, Gallo, they really never talked to the other people, very rarely, but they talked to him regularly. We knew that from our, so Carmen's the middleman. Carmen's the best one that could be a witness because he ran the day-to-day operations of the narcotics and he did most of the murders or knew exactly who did it or how they happened.
And he was good in court.
And he was very good in court. He was excellent in court.
And in January 1983, she nails her landing with a sweeping verdict.
The Cleveland Mob's second-in-command, Angelo Leonardo, guilty. Joe Gallo, his lieutenant, guilty. Kevin McTaggart, guilty. Hans Grau, guilty.
They were all found guilty. I found an old interview with Congenie Fitzsimmons just outside the courthouse.
We're very pleased by the results. We really had a great jury. They were very conscientious, and we think the result was justified by the evidence.
What is going through your mind? Like, especially, you know, all the cards were against you, like people didn't have confidence in you, and holy cow, like this moment, what is this like for you?
It was unbelievable. I was sitting there, so I have my legal pad, and I just had each of their names. And so when I hear, you know, and I have actually my note where I write GGG, guilty, 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 for the other names, I knew it was going to come. The whole thing was going to come because it showed the jury believed the story. The jury believed that this organization came together to commit murders, do drugs, and take over, you know, all the crime in the area, take that over and be the enterprise.
And what happened in that Cleveland courtroom would have a significant impact on organized crime in Cleveland and across the United States. Facing a lifelong prison sentence, the aging Leonardo was ready to cut a deal. And Bob Frederick was there to offer one.
I talked to him about a half an hour. We just talked about what was going on in Cleveland, okay? And I said, Angelo, let's face it, you got 103 years. You can't do 103 years. He said, I know. Okay, I said, look, and then I gave him my business card, and I said, if you ever need a favor, give me a call. I think we can work something out for you. I just thought that was the guy we needed because he could do a lot more. And then I gave him my business card, and I said, if you ever need a favor, give me a call. I think we can work something out for you.
Big Ange called a week later.
He said, I think I want to do business with you guys. I told my boss, he was ecstatic. And then the two of us, my boss and I, went and told the strike force, senior strike force attorney. And once we got finished with our presentation, he said, what can you do for Cleveland? And I said, Steve, you can't do anything for Cleveland. He said, well, I don't want him. Okay, so I stewed over that for a while. And then I said to my boss, I said, Joe, I'm going over to see Judge Manos. Come with me because you're good friends with him. We're going to have to backdoor these guys.
Now another young prosecutor was about to win instant fame. That man was Rudy Giuliani. He was prepping for a big trial in which he was going after the 5 families of New York.
These are extremely dangerous individuals. They are people who have destroyed the lives of other human beings.
And Frederick was thinking that Big Ange could be Giuliani's star witness.
And Angelo can testify against all of those guys. Angelo doesn't know what they're doing, but he can make the association in fact or the enterprise. In the RICO case, the enterprise has to be at least an association in fact. It can be a company, but it also can be an association in fact. So Angelo can say these guys are an organized group. So he can make the RICO case, and he can come in here and say, every one of these guys that I see sitting there are made members in the family, because I've met them all, and I'm a made member.
A few months later, Leonardo, hidden behind a screen to shield his face, became the first sitting mafia boss and the highest-ranking mobster to flip.
My name is Angelo Leonardo. I'm 77 years old. I'm a member of La Cosa Nostra. I'm a former underboss of the Cleveland organized crime family. I became a member of La Cosa Nostra in the late 1940s. I've been associated with the organization since the late 1920s. When I was made or became member of La Cosa Nostra, I went through an initiation ceremony. I was invited into the room at the Stettler Hotel in Cleveland. They explained to me that I have been proposed to be a member of La Cosa Nostra and define the rules and regulation of the organizations. They told me that you cannot fool around with narcotics. You cannot fool around with a woman that's married to a member of La Cosa Nostra. And that whatever illegal activity you engage in, you have to report to the boss and receive permission to engage in that activity. Once you accept the rules of membership, they lift the cloth off a table. Underneath is a gun and a dagger. You are told that you now live and die by the dagger and the gun. You are given a card with a picture of a saint on it. The card is placed in the palm of your hands and lit. You shake the burning card back and forth until it's burned down to ashes. Then they pinch your finger to draw blood. And then everyone kisses you on the cheek and says, you are a member now.
Leonardo would go on to reveal details of the Midwest mob skimming of Las Vegas casinos like the Desert Inn and the Stardust.
Kansas City will get the money from Las Vegas and cut it up between themselves, Cleveland and Milwaukee. The Cleveland family received a total of $40,000 a month from the scheme. To the best of my knowledge, the scheme continued until at least 1984.
He would also expose the inner workings of the mafia's politics.
Since the 1920s, my family has reported to a Genovese family in New York City. I traveled to New York on several occasions to discuss family business. In 1976, I went to New York to talk to Salerno to obtain his help on murdering Danny Green.
His testimony spanned several empires, from Ohio to New York to Chicago. And when it was all over, the mobster defendants were convicted in a 21-count indictment, made to serve sentences of 40 to 100 years, a crippling blow to the decades-old New York mafia. Meanwhile, Leonardo's prison term was reduced from life plus a century to just under 2 years.
Do you ever have any, do you feel any guilt about that?
No.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it. I mean, we took out a lot of people, or he did. I mean, with these cases all over the country. He testified against the 5 bosses. The 5 bosses went to jail. And his testimony was crucial because he showed that this was an enterprise.
Frederick points to a framed picture hanging on his wall. I walk closer. I see it's a sketch from the trial. Angelo is facing the courtroom testifying, and the 5 New York bosses are sitting, stone-faced. There is a note written on the bottom left of the sketch in black Sharpie. I ask him to read it.
Under your command, the family was clipped. Angelo signed that.
The family was clipped, and Leonardo went into the Federal Witness Protection Program. He did eventually return to Cleveland some years later, where he lived out his final years quietly, dying in his sleep at the age of 95. Coming up next time on Bomb City, USA. They pulled off one of the biggest bank burglaries of our time.
Cash and diamonds and gold. One bag was so big, it looked like Santa Claus coming walking up the hill.
Stealing millions of dollars that was rumored to belong to former President Richard Nixon.
I really didn't believe it at first, but coming from a source like Jimmy Hoffa, who got around good, head of the Teamsters, and he was friends with the mafia.
And they almost got away with it.
One of the downfalls started right at the beginning.
That part of the story next time on Bomb City, USA. This has been a production of WKYC Studios, reported and hosted by me, Rachel Polansky, produced by Phil Trexler, and edited by Gianni Catalano. Our digital director is Denise Pulverine. Our digital producer is Megan Hambaugh, and our archival researcher is Matt Hine. Special thanks to Mickey Burns, Adam Miller, John Atkins, Susan Moses, Mike Leonard, Barbara Polansky, and Michelino Covada for his narration of Angelo Leonardo.
Thanks for listening to Bomb City, USA with Rachel Polansky from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on WKYC.com and the WKYC app. From WKYC Studios and 3 News Investigates, this is Bomb City, USA, with your host, investigator Rachel Polansky.
Imagine pulling off one of the biggest bank heists of our time.
Cash and diamonds and gold.
Stealing millions of dollars.
One bag was so big, it looked like Santa Claus coming walking up the hill.
Some of which was rumored to be dirty money, belonging to President Richard Nixon.
I really didn't believe it at first, but, you know, coming from a source like Jimmy Hoffa, who got around good, and head of the Teamsters, you know, he knew, and he had a lot of underhanded stuff too, and he was friends with the mafia.
Only to be found out because one of your friends forgot to bring the fake IDs.
One of the downfalls started right at the beginning when my friend Charlie forgot to bring the phony ID. And I went against my better judgment and still got on the plane.
In episode 1, we talked about the rise and fall of the Irishman, Danny Green. In episode 2, we dug into the mafia boss who flipped on his Cleveland crime family and helped take down 5 New York City godfathers. Now, we're taking a closer look at a crew of mobbed up burglars who pulled off one of the biggest break-ins ever and almost got away with it. My name is Rachel Polansky. I'm an investigative reporter at WKYC Studios in Cleveland, Ohio. And this is Bomb City, USA, a true story about organized crime, murder, and a fight for control that left everyone dead or behind bars. This is episode 3, The Heist. A score of a lifetime. That's what Youngstown burglar Emil Dinzio was thinking in 1972 when a Cleveland mobster told him about the job.
President Nixon having $30 million, you know, in a bank in California.
Richard Nixon was still in the White House. Watergate hadn't happened yet. And according to the tipster, a stash of $30 million, some of which was rumored to belong to Nixon, was sitting in a bank vault in California. Nixon had allegedly been shaking down the U.S. dairy farmers, promising to raise the price of raw milk if the farmers' lobby gave him a big contribution. While it sounded unbelievable, Dinzio said it came from a well-known source.
I really didn't believe it at first, but, you know, coming from a source like Jimmy Hoffa, who got around good, and head of the Teamsters, you know, he knew, and he had a lot of underhanded stuff too, and he was friends with the mafia. Jimmy Hoffa and the mafia were pretty tight. He told us where it was, Laguna Niguel. We didn't know where Laguna Niguel was. But we got ready and we took a trip out there. We drove out there.
The tipster said the loot was in a safety deposit box at the United California Bank in Laguna Niguel, a sleepy beach town about 1 hour south of LA. So Emil Dinzio, along with his brother James Dinzio and his brother-in-law Chuck Mulligan, rented a car and headed west, arriving in the Golden State a few days later.
We found Laguna Niguel and the bank said perfect, you know. So we put surveillance on the bank and all that.
The bank was located inside a shopping center, so they spent the first night watching what happened after dark. While there were a few nearby stores, none of them stayed open 24/7. This was a good thing, because it meant people wouldn't be around. Later, a cleaning crew arrived at the bank, and Emil's brother James followed them to get a better look inside. That's when he noticed a stainless steel door protecting the bank's vault. Just what Emil was hoping for.
We knew what the vault was made of. It was made out of cement blocks and a 1-inch plate inside. The only thing protecting people's money is the alarm system. You beat the alarm, you beat the bank. That's what it boils down to. The only thing that protects the money or the safety deposit boxes is the alarm system.
Meanwhile, Emil was making his way to the back of the bank to check out the alarm system. And when he looked up, he could read the brand name, Diebold. More good news.
The bell outside, it was a Diebold bell, but it'll start ringing too if the alarm goes off. It has 3 bolts in it. The bolt in the lower right-hand corner is the only one that didn't have a tamper switch on it. Like if you could back it out, it was a long bolt, you could back it out and the alarm ain't going off. So we knew that from experiences.
Clearly, this was not Emil's first rodeo. The 85-year-old, who has a full head of white hair and is wearing a crisp white polo and khaki slacks, has a big smile on his face when he greets me in Youngstown. We're not far from the town he spent much of his youth.
I grew up on a farm in Goshen Township, Ohio. We were poor as poor could be. Our house didn't have electric. And there were 7 of us.
He cuts himself off mid-sentence, pauses, and says, "But you want to know how I got into the burglary business, right?" I nod my head yes.
At first, me and my brother was sticking up banks. We never hurt nobody. We'd say, hit the ground, they hit the ground. We'd grab money.
He guesses that he and his brother James are responsible for more than 70 bank robberies and burglaries in the United States. And it's not something he's ashamed of.
First bank we made was down there in West Virginia, across from Steubenville, Ohio. Maybe a couple years after that, my sister Palma, she got a job in the Boardman Plaza at the Isley's Dairy Store. And I would take her to work. I'm sitting out there taking her to work, and I see this guy inside the bank, and he's down by the night depository, and he's pulling out bags. And I'm looking at that, and I said, shit, that's where the money is.
At first, he says they did stick-ups. Then they graduated to safety deposit boxes and bank vaults.
So I told my brother James, I says, hey, you got to see this. We go there, we watch, and he says, God damn. I says, that's what we got to do, how to do that. So there was a sign on the window of the bank. It says, premises protected by Diebold. What the hell's Diebold? We don't know nothing about Diebold. So we used ordinary phone book, and we looked it up, and the Diebold Corporation was in Canton, Ohio. So we went up to Canton, Ohio, all fenced up. There's a guard out by the road, and we just watched that night for a couple of nights, and he didn't even come out of the shed. So we slipped under the fence, over the fence. First building we hit is where they was making safes, and it was the round door safes. And there was square ones too. There's cement safes, everything. There was doors laying out, getting ready to be put on safes and everything. So that night we stole one of them doors and we took it with us. It was a big one. It weighed maybe 300 pounds, 250, 300. It's real thick and it's special steel, like real hard.
You heard right. They stole a factory door to a safe. Then they created a special jig and figured out the best way to crack it open.
We said, hell, these bank vaults ain't shit, you know what I mean? They fall apart, you know. So that's how we learned how to blow open bank vaults.
So how old were you at this time?
16,
Wow.
17.
Fast forward to 1972, and Dinzio is now 36 years old, a seasoned safecracker, standing outside the United California Bank in Laguna Niguel, looking up at a Diebold alarm system. Everything was going according to plan. Now it was time to drive back to Youngstown and prep, get the tools and the crew he needed to pull this off.
There was me, James, and Chuck. Okay, that was the original thing, right?
Emil Dinzio was the leader. He also handled the alarms. James Dinzio, his brother, was the explosives expert. Chuck Mulligan, his brother-in-law, was responsible for acquiring and hiding the tools. Emil also enlisted his nephews, Harry and Ronnie Barber. Harry would be the getaway driver, and Ronnie, who lived in California and had a clean record, would be able to rent a condo nearby. Then there was Phil Christopher, a Cleveland burglar who was nicknamed Super Thief, who specialized in alarms, and his mobbed-up partner, Charlie Brockles.
A lot of people say to me, you know, where'd you get the nerve to do it? I don't know where I got it. It just became a routine thing. It just was simple, you know.
I met with the 78-year-old Super Thief on a cool autumn day at a suburban park about 30 minutes east of Cleveland. Phil Christopher is clean-shaven, wearing a black polo and a baseball cap that says Iron Workers Local. He grew up in Danny Green's old stomping grounds, Collinwood, and he remembers his childhood fondly.
Family life? Oh, my family life, my parents were wonderful. You know, I mean, they took care of me. There's nothing, even when I did something wrong, maybe it might have been their mistake, and if I did something wrong, they were there to back me up. I think I was around 16 or something like that. I was a doorman at this dry cleaner on St. Clair Avenue, where I was letting the guys in and out, where they have the dice games down in the basements or card games, you know, and then I was able to meet a lot of the guys, the older guys, and one of them like took me under his wing, you know, and he taught me, a close friend of mine, how to open up a square door safe. So we were 16 years old, and it was 4 of us. We went and we burglarized a drugstore, and wound up getting like $1,700. And that was a lot of money back then, you know. And it just sort of like escalated after that.
Christopher says Cleveland and Youngstown were home to the best thieves in the world. So he watched and he learned about alarms, safes, and vaults.
If you learn from the best and you're mechanically inclined, but then you're gonna be the best of the best. You know, that's all to it.
I asked him how he met the Dinzio brothers. As expected, through a friend of his, a mobster named Ronnie the Crab Carabia. You might remember him from episode 2. He worked with Ray Ferrito on the Danny Green murder.
Ronnie introduced me to Amo and James Dinzio. So then later on, the Dinzios called me and they wanted me to come up to Youngstown. So I went up to Youngstown and spoke with them. And they told me that they had the score in California, you know, that they were looking at. So anyways, I says, well, it's all right, but I bring Charlie, my good close friend. I mean, because I ran with a lot of guys, you know. And they said yes. So anyways, that's how it came to be with the Dinzios and how we went to California together.
And so the 7-man crew is assembled. And in March, they return to Laguna Niguel. The Barber brothers rent the condo. The Dinzio brothers map out the plan. And Chuck Mulligan rekindles an old friendship with a man named Earl Dawson who lives nearby, asking him if he can leave a 1962 Oldsmobile in his garage. This doesn't sound important now, but it will be. Soon, Friday night arrives. At 9 p.m., Mulligan heads to his lookout position. By 10:30, it's showtime. The others make their way to the bank. First step is beating the interior alarm by using a piece of copper wire. Second step is beating the exterior alarm by spraying a liquid styrofoam into the alarm box.
And then we stick the plastic hose up in there, open the styrofoam up, and it goes shh, goes up around the bell clapper. Now it can't make no noise. So that's how you silence that.
When the alarm does not sound, they climb up to the roof and they start to drill.
The Dayton gearhead motor, that's all, Dayton gearhead motor, runs real quiet. And it turns 2,250 RPMs, so that's fast. And we use a core drill, not a straight drill, but we use a core, drill core out. And we put a strap around the drill, put 2 big handles like this here to hold it to low pressure, and that's what we use to drill the concrete. Real quiet, you couldn't hear it if you was outside. You just got just humming.
Once they cut into the roof, Emil starts to see thousands of hairline cracks running in every direction. This, he says, means the concrete is weak.
So we even had to cut down on the explosives a little bit, so when the blast goes off, it takes most of the concrete and everything right down into the vault.
Bingo, they're in. Now they drop into the vault. It's around 2 a.m.
We went straight for Nixon's boxes. We had the numbers. And we took that money out and down by the Pacific Coast Highway, like we had it all laid out on our minds to do.
Over the course of 3 nights, they empty 450 safety deposit boxes. The bank is closed for the weekend, so they don't have to worry about workers coming in or out.
Was there $30 million?
No, it was 12 million.
How much?
12.
12 million.
Yeah, but I wish it was 30.
When it comes to the total amount stolen, it seems the passage of time has clouded truth from reality. As we all know, stories often grow larger than life. Dinzio says they got Nixon's dirty money, plus another $800,000 from the boxes. Phil Christopher says they made out with the $30 million, and they never found Nixon's money.
After we got all the loot and we were done, we brought everything back to the condo that was rented and started going through everything with cash and diamonds and gold and the bearer bonds, and there was one bag. One bag was so big it looked like Santa Claus coming walking up the hill. That was just one bag, and there was two big bags, but that was the biggest one. And while we were sitting there in the condo, going through all the bearer bonds, it was totally unreal, the numbers, amounts of money on those bearer bonds, and we kept on adding it up, and we quit, I think, at 30 million. You know, there wasn't that much cash, but there was diamonds there that they were so big they looked phony, and there was a lot of gold.
That's not all these two disagree about. Even though 49 years have passed since that California heist, there is still bad blood between Dinzio and Christopher.
And then what about Phil Christopher? What was his job?
Nothing. Should have never had him there.
What about Charlie Brickell?
Yeah, nothing too, but should have never had him there.
Regardless, they got the cash, the bonds, and the jewels, and they head back to the condo. Then, and this is taken from courtroom testimony, Dinzio, Mulligan, and Barber drive back to Earl Dawson's house. Remember the place Mulligan hid the Oldsmobile earlier? They stashed their burglar tools in the trunk of the car. With that last piece of business taken care of, they need a way to transport the loot from California to Ohio. Remember, it's heavy and bulky. So Dinzio says they use a boat, hitched to a trailer. Then they drive to Las Vegas to launder the money. Some of it stays there, and some of it goes back to Youngstown. Meanwhile, the United California Bank opens on Monday morning, and when employees return to work, the vault's automatic time lock won't work. So the manager calls a locksmith, who tries unsuccessfully to release the lock. By mid-afternoon, the decision is made to break into the vault. The locksmith looks at the top of the vault and discovers the job has already been done for him. Bank officials are stunned. So too are the FBI agents. The heist made national news, not only for the scope of the take, but for the methodical tactics used by the Ohio burglars.
And I've also heard that you're the best burglar who ever lived. Would you agree with that?
That's probably true. Me and my brother.
What do you think made you guys so good?
But I never let nobody know what I was doing.
According to a 1972 newspaper report, investigators seem to marvel at the burglars' impeccable work. No fingerprints or incriminating evidence left behind. It would take another 3 weeks before a complete accounting of the loss would take form. Many safety deposit box holders could not remember what was inside the boxes. Others could not be contacted. Officers also believe the bulk of the cash could have been in boxes for another reason, tax evasion. And those losses would, of course, never be reported. Meanwhile, the search for the burglars was taxing law enforcement, taking hundreds of man-hours, yet turning up very little evidence.
Did you think, we got away with it, we're not going to get caught?
Well, sure you do. You always think that.
2 months later, the Youngstown crew thinks they're untouchable. They get a little greedy. They decide to do another burglary, this time closer to home, at a bank in Lordstown, Ohio, directly across the street from a General Motors factory.
This guy from Canton, Ohio, from Warren, Ohio, he was a detective, and he was all right. And he came to me and he told me there's going to be $3 million there for the Lordstown paydays, right? So I told James about it. James and Chuck Mulligan, he's my brother-in-law. He says, "Man," he says, "we're fat. We don't got to do that. We got all that money." I say, "It's $3 million. That don't come around too often." I says, "Pretty fast we can do this," and we could, because we knew the bank vault. The bank vault was cement block and a 1-inch liner. We knew the alarm was Diebold. We knew all about it.
Again, they follow what worked in California. They spray the liquid styrofoam into the alarm, cut through the roof, and explode the vault. Once inside, Dinzio starts stuffing cash into a large duffel bag, and his smile turns to a frown. He counts the loot, $430,000. A decent haul, he says, but certainly not worth the risk. especially with what lies ahead.
So that's what was really our downfall, because that really intensified the FBI and the director and all of them to get them at all costs. You know, and they wound up it came out during the trial that they had 200 FBI agents on our case for 3 months.
The Ohio heist was so similar to the California heist, it was easy for the FBI to start connecting the dots. According to an affidavit made public later, when agents pulled the airline records, they saw Emil Dinzio and 4 of his friends flew from Cleveland to LA on March 15th, just days before the United California bank heist. It's something Phil Christopher still calls a dumb and avoidable mistake.
My friend Charlie forgot to bring the phony ID, and I went against my better judgment and still got on the plane. If I'd have had the phony ID, driver's license, like I wanted, I mean I had, but Charlie forgot to bring them, my name would have never been on the airline, you know.
But things were about to get even worse for the burglars. Using the airline tickets as a lead, FBI agents descended upon LAX, carrying their mugshots and interviewing taxi drivers.
And they wound up meeting this one taxi cab driver that we all got in the cab with, and well, Emil winds up giving him a $100 tip, so the guy remembered that. You know, I mean, a $100 tip for driving somebody from the airport, that's sort of unbelievable. You know, so that was a bad thing there, you know. So they found out our names on a manifest, and then they also found out where the cab driver drove us to. Then, you know, just one thing led to another after that. It was just...
Soon agents checked the record of phone calls made by Chuck Mulligan. Included in that record was a call to Earl Dawson. They got a search warrant, discovered the 1962 Oldsmobile, popped open the trunk, and found what they were looking for, the burglar tools. And when they checked Ronnie Barber's phone records, they got another hit. Several calls to a Laguna Niguel phone number, the realtor who rented them the townhouse. When they searched inside, they found fingerprints in an unusual place, on dishes that were loaded into a dishwasher that was never turned on. To this day, Emil Dinzio is bitter, insisting the feds cheated and planted those prints.
But it was over 2 months later, dirty dishes in the dishwasher, forget it. In California especially, they're gonna sweat, they're gonna stink, it's gonna be all moldy. You ain't pulling nothing off of there.
Regardless, the FBI felt they had enough evidence to make a move. They arrested Phil Christopher. Inside his bedroom closet, they found a paper bag stuffed with $32,000. According to the prosecution, 2 loose bills were traced to a South Laguna woman who had noted the serial numbers of the memento currency. Other bills were traced to the Lordstown Bank. A few days later, an even larger amount of cash was found, this time, according to court records, by a 13-year-old boy who lived across the street from Emil Dinzio. He found a plastic jug packed with $98,000 buried near a tree in his yard. That same day, a federal grand jury issued an indictment charging Emil Dinzio.
Eventually, I think it was in June, is when you're arrested.
June 27th.
June 27th. You remember that date?
Yeah, June 27th.
What happened that day?
I pulls out the driveway. I always watch my mirror. I look in my mirror behind, and I see 2 cars come out of my neighbor's driveway. Lights flashing, blue light at me. I just drive normal. First thing, they come swarming up. A couple cars come pulling out of side streets. They were all set for me to leave because they know I wouldn't watch in my house. From my neighbor's house, no question about it. And stopped my car, guns all out of me, and said, Emil Dinzio, FBI, you're under arrest. I jump out. That's all I did. Come up, hands behind my back like that there.
After Dinzio was arrested, court records say FBI agents armed with a search warrant descended upon his home, turning it upside down, looking for evidence. And when they left, according to the prosecution, they took a gold-plated silver dollar and a $20 bill, both of which were traced back to Laguna Niguel. During the month-long trial, dozens of witnesses are called and more than 250 exhibits are shown. While testimony dragged for several weeks, final arguments were relatively short. Soon the 7-man, 5-woman jury received the case, and after 2 full days of deliberations, they returned the verdict: guilty, on charges of conspiracy, larceny, and bank burglary. Emil Dinzio, Chuck Mulligan, and Phil Christopher are sentenced to 20 years. James Dinzio and Ronnie Barber get 15. And Charlie Brockles flips, becoming an unindicted co-conspirator, or as Dinzio calls him, a rat.
Set him right up with the FBI and them. You know, that's bad to do that. When you're a thief, right? I mean, you're supposed to be.
According to reports, the FBI is able to recover between $2 and $4 million. Phil Christopher serves 4 years for the heist. After he is paroled, he starts selling drugs. He is in and out of prison. In total, he spends 27 years behind bars. He meets his wife Marianne in 1998, and they are still married today. He says he leaves his life of crime behind and gets a job as an iron worker. He has 1 son, 2 stepdaughters, and 6 grandchildren. Author and historian Rick Perello, who you met in episode 1, would go on to write a book chronicling Phil Christopher's life, called Super Thief. As for Emil Dinzio, he served 8 years for the heist. When he got out, he went back to doing burglaries, and he went back to prison. In total, he spent 37 years locked up. Through it all, he says, his wife Linda, his daughters Melissa and Amy Jo, and his 2 grandchildren stood by his side. He also went on to write a book called Inside the Vault, and to this day, he believes the FBI agents who searched his home stole items with his fingerprints to frame him for the Laguna Niguel bank burglary.
As far as the FBI investigation, you don't feel they played fair?
Oh, I know they don't. When they steal that, are they playing fair? No. When they burglarize my garage, are they playing fair? No. Okay, they framed me to convict me.
Coming up next time on Bomb City, USA, the Irishman's lieutenant. While Danny Green did not survive, his right-hand man did. Kevin McTaggart is still in prison today, but at age 64, he wants out of his life prison sentence.
I think he paid his dues to society, and I don't believe that he done all those things that they say, you know. But
and he has a cast of unusual advocates pushing for his release.
If you look at recent changes in federal sentencing laws and you look at the particular circumstances of Kevin's case, including almost 40 years incarcerated, excellent records of conduct, of education, of service to his community, and other factors, you know, if I was one of the decision makers, yes, he would have my vote for release.
That part of the story next time on Bomb City, USA. This has been a production of WKYC Studios, reported and hosted by me, Rachel Polansky, produced by Phil Trexler, and edited by Gianni Catalano. Our digital director is Denise Pulverine, our digital producer is Megan Hambaugh, and our archival researcher is Matt Hine. Special thanks to Mickey Burns, Adam Miller, John Atkins, Susan Moses, Mike Leonard, Dominic Trickus, and Barbara Polansky. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Bomb City, USA with Rachel Polansky from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update, and find more on WKYC.com and the WKYC app. From WKYC Studios and 3 News Investigates, this is Bomb City, USA, with your host, investigator Rachel Polansky.
He may be the nicest mobster hitman you'll ever meet. Don't take my word for it. Ask the FBI agent and federal prosecutor who put him in prison, or the warden who kept him locked up. Even a beloved pro football star has a soft spot for Kevin McTaggart.
Former Browns quarterback Bernie Kosar has written a letter and offered his man-away home to the convicted and currently incarcerated Kevin McTaggart.
Hearts apparently soften after 40 years. Memories don't.
While Bostic was walking down the stairs of Zagaria's West Side pet store, Zagaria says McTaggart shot him twice in the head. When he went down to look, Segaria told jurors, Hans in his right hand had this cleaver, and he was chopping at Bostic's left hand. Later, the surgeon, Grau's nickname, told Segaria he cut off both his hands as well as Bostic's head, joking, Kevin's a murderer, but I can only get in trouble for malpractice.
My name is Rachel Polansky. I'm an investigative reporter at WKYC Studios in Cleveland, Ohio. And this is Bomb City, USA, a true story about organized crime, murder, and a fight for control that left everyone dead or behind bars. In the first 3 episodes, we explored the rise of organized crime in Cleveland through the eyes of those who lived it. Kevin McTaggart is one of the sole survivors. His life seemingly preserved in time, safely sealed behind bars for nearly 4 decades. Today, the ruthless hitman who killed for money wants to come home, saying he's a changed man. And you'll be surprised by the group of people who are supporting him. This is episode 4, The Irishman's Lieutenant. Every morning, Kevin McTaggart stares up at words of encouragement posted on the wall in his prison cell. All each of us can do is to live in the now that is given. We can only carry out each stage of our lives to the best of our abilities, end quote. He says it's his daily affirmation, a reminder of where he's at now. It's also a hint of how he got there.
Yeah, I remember Kevin McTaggart. He was Danny Green's man. Absolutely. They were his people, for the want of a better word. They would hurt you real bad.
Kevin Joseph McTaggart grew up on Cleveland's west side. It was a segregated city. Blacks on the east side, whites on the west side. Desegregation was just around the corner. McTaggart was a union worker's son. It was a modest upbringing for him and his brother, and largely uninspiring. He carried a D average, good enough to graduate from John Marshall High School with a below-average 1.8 GPA. But his grade contradicted his IQ, one scored at an above-average 114. He never married, he had no children. Fact is, he never even moved out of his parents' home. He didn't need to. He had Danny Green on his side, the Irishman. A flashy, arrogant, and ruthless mobster who I introduced you to in episode 1.
You could not miss Danny Green with that flaming red hair, driving that emerald Lincoln, and those green suits.
He grew up hustling. It's hard to take the hustle and larceny out of somebody who grew up with nothing.
Kevin McTaggart was viewed as a lieutenant in Danny Green's Celtic Club.
I bet you he never cried a day.
Why do you say that?
He's a tough guy.
If this were a traditional corporate business, McTaggart would be the vice president of security. In the underworld, he was the muscle to the Godfather. He did the dirty work. And in the late 1970s, there was a lot of dirt to sweep up.
Another mob bombing in 1977. Teamster Union official John Nardi was apparently trying to muscle in on the organized crime action.
When I got here, there was pieces of body all over the place.
Remember, Cleveland's underworld was at war, as the Irish and Italians struggled for power following the death of boss Johnny Scalish.
It wasn't about we're going to have a peaceful separating of the ways here, you know what I mean? There was no prenup. They're going to kill you and take what I want.
It was the battle of the bosses, Danny Green versus James Jack White Licavoli. A truce of attrition was only reached in 1977 when Green was killed in a car bombing.
5 months later, Danny Green, also challenging the mob leadership, blown up in a parking lot in Lyndhurst.
McTaggart, along with brothers Hans and Fred Grau, were responsible for internal and external security for the enterprise. And this is according to court documents. Did so by, quote, murdering competing drug dealers and suspected police informants.
Kevin McTaggart survived that round of convictions after Danny Green's murder to go on to be part of a drug ring that included leftover members of the Cleveland mafia, and he became sort of a secondary player of that drug ring.
Finally, in 1982, the feds muscled their way in, armed with indictments. Bob Frederick headed the FBI unit that brought down the Cleveland mafia. And Donna Congeni Fitzsimmons, who you met in episode 2, was the assistant federal prosecutor.
We had so much evidence, and you just had to be methodical, and that's basically what we had going for us. We knew it. I knew it, you know, I knew it like I knew my name. And because I'd been involved in the beginning, I knew every twist and turn of how this case came about.
McTaggart was indicted along with the brothers Fred and Hans Grau. The latter was nicknamed the Surgeon for his efficiency in dismembering men that he killed. Also indicted were Joey Gallo and acting boss Angelo Leonardo.
The Cleveland mob's second-in-command, Angelo Leonardo, guilty. Joe Gallo, his lieutenant, guilty. Kevin McTaggart, guilty. Hans Grau, guilty.
Prosecutors connected McTaggart to 6 killings, all of them mob-related. They also connected him to drug sales that topped $20 million a year under Carmen Zagaria.
Each of these murders occurred, but they did not occur with any of these people seated here involved. Kevin McTaggart's attorney attacked the prosecutors themselves, calling them naive, inexperienced kids. Indeed, he told jurors, Kevin McTaggart, once an FBI informant himself, would be a government witness too, but he didn't tell them what they want to hear.
Carmen Zagaria, a former mobster turned government informant, was the star witness, and his testimony buried McTaggart and the others.
The Carmen thing was the big break because he was a great witness, and we had the supporting corroboration evidence that made everything that he said we could prove was true.
The media attention was massive in federal court in downtown Cleveland. It was a rare opportunity for the public to get an inside view of the organized crime network that dominated the city for decades. It was also a chance to learn firsthand of the callousness that drove these men.
The West Side did run a game in Lindale. According to Zagaria, he and defendants Kevin McTaggart, Hans Grau, and Joseph Gallo were partners. So was another man, Billy Bostic, who Zagaria testified stole some of the profits. In June of 1980, while Bostic was walking down the stairs of Zagaria's West Side pet store, Zagaria says McTaggart shot him twice in the head. When he went down to look, Zagaria told jurors, Hans in his right hand had this cleaver, and he was chopping at Bostic's left hand. Later, the Surgeon, Grau's nickname, told Zagaria he cut off both his hands as well as Bostic's head, joking, Kevin's a murderer, but I can only get in trouble for malpractice.
In the end, the feds won. McTaggart and the others all received lifelong prison sentences for racketeering and conspiracy.
It was unbelievable. I was sitting there, so I have my legal pad, and I just had each of their names, and so when I hear, you know, and I have actually my note where I write GGG, guilty, 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 for the other names, I knew it was going to come. The whole thing was going to come because it showed the jury believed the story. The jury believed that this organization came together to commit murders, do drugs, and take over, you know, all the crime in the area. Take that over and be the enterprise.
And while Angelo Leonardo brokered his own deal to spare himself, McTaggart kept his vow. He kept his mouth shut and was sent to prison for the first time in his life at the young age of 26. Now, nearly 40 years later, he's waging a new war for freedom, and he has an unlikely group of allies. Bob Frederick, the FBI agent who cracked the Cleveland Mafia, Donna Congeni Fitzsimmons, the former federal prosecutor and now a local judge, a federal prison warden, along with multiple prison staff members. Even Bernie Kosar, a Cleveland Browns legend who quarterbacked the team to 3 AFC championship games, is in McTaggart's corner. You see, once he landed behind bars, McTaggart did what he did when Danny Green died. He switched teams. Cleveland's Phil Christopher, nicknamed Super Thief, came to know him very well.
When did you end up sharing a cell with Kevin McTaggart?
I think it was 1984. Kevin was a very nice person. I mean, he's always very respectful. He's always going out and helping somebody if they needed help within the institution. I mean, no matter who they were, you know, he wasn't one of these wise guys that had a chip on his shoulder or anything. A nice person. We always had fun together, you know, him and me, Tommy Sanito, Tony Libertor. I mean, there was a whole crew of us together, and you know, we'd have cook our macaroni, you know, and we cook our tomato sauce and everything all together. We sit down. It was, and like I say, living with Kevin was a lot of fun, you know. couldn't say, I can't say anything bad about him, you know.
In prison, McTaggart's been the perfect inmate, literally perfect. According to records, he's had 0 infractions in the nearly 39 years he's been incarcerated. But at age 64, he wants out of his life prison sentence, and he's asked a judge for compassionate release. He's also compiled a dozen letters of support from friends in high places, including an associate warden who said, quote, "This may sound strange coming from a staff member at a United States penitentiary. However, in this business, you come across a person who has demonstrated that he can go back into society and make a go for it. I feel that Kevin is one of those people," adding, "He is seen at this institution to be a role model for other inmates," end quote. Prison records dating back to the 1980s show that McTaggart completed his GED, has taken dozens of classes and programs studying topics titled human behavior, stress in your body, and back on yoga. He studied the American Civil War, real estate sales, and understanding investments. In the 1990s, he took part in classes on physical fitness, jogging, and weight training. His risk assessment evaluation, a -16 and a -4, some of the lowest on record. On the outside, he took lives. On the inside, he saved lives. According to court filings, on one occasion in 1987, he was hailed a hero for helping to save the life of a prison psychologist who was taken hostage and slashed with a razor by another inmate. It was McTaggart who went for help. In a letter of support, that woman wrote, "On the day that matters most to me, Mr. McTaggart made the morally right decision to help save my life, despite subjecting himself to possible fatal repercussions for doing so. This makes him a hero to me," end quote. Bob Frederick, long since retired from the FBI, believes that McTaggart is no longer a threat. Like the others, he views McTaggart as a product of his environment. His victims, rival soldiers, casualties of a long-gone mob battle. In his letter of support, he wrote, quote, "I am fully aware that there are no guarantees, but I feel that if he is released, he will become a productive member of society, given the few years that he has left," end quote. And for the past 26 years, Donna Congeni Fitzsimmons has been a municipal court judge. But she's not forgotten her prosecution days, when she won convictions against some of our nation's most connected mobsters. In her letter urging McTaggart's release, she called his prison record pristine, adding, quote, "In light of the extraordinary and compelling circumstances which underscore the transformative rehabilitation achieved by Mr. McTaggart, I am advocating that you strongly consider compassionate release for this man," end quote. But not all letters written to the judge have been supportive. One woman whose grandfather was associated with McTaggart and killed during this time period wrote, quote, "Never in my lifetime did I imagine that such a thoughtless human being capable of such evil acts would be released," adding, "I implore you to not allow this man to ever walk free," end quote. If he is released, McTaggart has several places he could live. His brother, Buddy McTaggart, has offered up his home, and Cleveland Browns great Bernie Kosar has offered his guest house, as well as a job running various projects at his farm that's located in Kent, Ohio. In his letter of support, Kosar said, quote, "I look forward to having his assistance in managing the property," adding, "I firmly believe in giving deserving people a second chance in life. I feel confident that Kevin will continue to live a righteous life, which he has exhibited during his incarceration," end quote. McTaggart's longtime lawyer says he isn't a peacebreaker any longer. Rather, time and time again, he's brokered peace among inmates and staff. Now in his mid-60s, McTaggart's body is showing its age. He has osteoarthritis in his spine, knees, and back. His shoulder and both knees need replacing. He has high blood pressure and glaucoma. He is, as his attorney notes, your typical senior citizen. Only in McTaggart's case, he's had a, quote, "priceless education these past 38 years. Here's a small excerpt of what he wrote in his 3-page letter to the judge.
While these years of confinement have been difficult, it has been a journey of reflection, remorse, sorrow, inspiration, discovery, friendship, love, blessings, and hard-won wisdom. 38 years ago, the start of my incarceration was the darkest moment of my life. I had hit rock bottom. Since I was sentenced to be locked away for the rest of my life, I was compelled to spend countless hours in deep inner reflection, soul-searching, and the pursuit of spiritual guidance. In light of my background, of my case, and the life sentence that I was serving, I was granted, for lack of a better term, prison street cred, by the prison population, and I was accepted immediately by convicts, gang leaders, organized crime figures, and other criminals. Instead of gravitating toward those groups, I decided to use my so-called status as a platform. I wanted to change the inmate perception of how self-improvement was viewed and erase the stigma attached within prison culture to those who sought to better themselves and improve their chances of a successful transition upon release. I became inspired to reach out and help others, especially younger inmates. Many of those guys were getting a second chance at freedom, but they were also looking for guidance and support to change the direction of their lives. If given the chance, I am fully committed to continue my work of giving back to others consistently. I believe that if I can deliver and discuss my story of prison and life experiences with at-risk youths, especially those of an impressionable age when they are so easily influenced, I may be able to prevent some of them from entering the prison system.
The impact of the FBI on the Cleveland organized crime network cannot be understated. Through their efforts, agents cut the head and the tail, and legendary mobsters who weren't killed were put in prison.
He's a top man in Cleveland on the street right now in organized crime, and so it was very important that he was convicted. You combine this case, the results of this case, with the results of the Green investigation, I can say positively that this is the most severe blow that's ever been struck against a La Cosa Nostra family in the United States.
The Cleveland mob carried on after Leonardo's brief reign ended. 3 different leaders followed with varying degrees of success. By the early 1990s, the Cleveland mob was officially declared inactive by the FBI. Some in law enforcement, perhaps naively, called them extinct. Rumors persist, however, that organized crime is still operating in the city. Closely knit, low-key, with less than 24 made men. As for Kevin McTaggart, despite his army of supporters, as of June 2021, the judge had yet to decide on his bid for compassionate release. And just last week, the judge asked prosecutors to reach out to family members of victims. So, is he still a mobster, or is he truly reformed? Retired police chief and author Rick Perillo, who wrote the book Bombs, Bullets, and Bribes, says McTaggart is an exception to the rule.
Most of these murders, these guys were players. They were not innocent victims of random, unpredictable violence. These were players who knew or should have known the risks involved in being involved in crime, especially being involved in drug trafficking. So I look at them more as participants who should have known the dangers rather than innocent victims. And don't get me wrong, I mean, murder is murder and you can't ever forget the victims. But I just look at it as a different perspective. And, you know, if I was one of the decision makers, yes, he would have my vote for release.
And that wraps up our series, Bomb City, USA. This has been a production of WKYC Studios, reported and hosted by me, Rachel Polansky, produced by Phil Trexler, and edited by Gianni Catalano. Our digital director is Denise Pulverine. Our digital producer is Megan Hambaugh, and our archival researcher is Matt Hine. Special thanks to Mickey Burns, Adam Miller, John Atkins, Susan Moses, Mike Leonard, and Fred Polansky.
Thanks for listening to Bomb City, USA with Rachel Polansky from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update, and find more on WKYC.com and the WKYC app.